In the sunlit kitchen, Grace placed her 8-month-old daughter Sophia in the high chair while preparing breakfast. Her daughter's bright blue eyes sparkled as she flashed an innocent smile at her mother. Grace's heart warmed at the sight of her little one clutching the hem of her white apron and cooing. "Good morning, sweetheart. Looks like we're in for another beautiful day." Grace planted a gentle kiss on her daughter's soft cheek. Her blonde hair swayed, tickling the baby's nose. Sophia reached for her mother's hair, beginning to giggle with delight. How precious these moments were. Outside the window, neighborhood housewives strode past in their jogging attire. The fresh early summer breeze gently stirred the lace curtains. Their white colonial mansion stood in Greenwich, Connecticut's upscale residential area, on a street lined with beautiful maple trees. She and her husband Brian, who worked at the investment bank Goldman Sachs, had settled here 2 years ago after their wedding. Her mother-in-law Eleanor, a former high school teacher, lived nearby and always looked out for the young couple. The wedding ceremony was held at St. Michael's Lutheran Church just down the street. Grace still vividly remembered her mother-in-law's expression that day, proudly watching her only son and beaming with joy at welcoming a new family member. Her late father-in-law had been a renowned professor at Yale University. The vows they exchanged under his memorial portrait remained deeply etched in her heart. After graduating from New York University's School of Nursing, Grace had worked as a nurse in the pediatric ward at Presbyterian Hospital. However, she chose to become a full-time homemaker after Sophia's birth. While she often felt uncertain about the unfamiliar tasks of child-rearing, her mother-in-law had been there to gently support her. They enjoyed gardening together on weekends, and at the monthly block parties, Eleanor taught her the proper etiquette of neighborhood socializing. What had initially been an anxious mother-in-law relationship had grown into one of deep trust. But lately, her husband's behavior had been gradually changing. He started coming home later and later, and family conversations dwindled. He was constantly on his phone, seemingly exchanging frequent messages with someone. They used to enjoy picnics at the nearby park on holidays, but now he was hardly ever home, citing business engagements as the reason. He stopped showing up at weekend garden club gatherings. Last week, she was shocked when she saw the credit card statement. There were numerous unfamiliar high charges, expensive restaurant meals, late-night bar tabs, and most concerning of all, airline tickets to Las Vegas. When confronted, he dismissed it as necessary business entertainment and wouldn't discuss it further. Last night too, her husband hadn't come home until late and had left early this morning. The breakfast laid out on the open kitchen's island counter, toast, scrambled eggs, and fresh fruit, remained untouched. The phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Grace, about Brian, there's something we need to discuss." There was an unusual urgency in her mother-in-law's voice, different from her typical composed manner. "Can you come over tomorrow? Around 2 p.m., bring Sophia too." "Of course." "Is something wrong?" "I can't discuss it over the phone. We'll talk tomorrow." As she hung up the receiver, anxiety spread through Grace's heart. Doubts about her beloved husband. The happy days they had built together felt as fragile as a glass vessel, ready to shatter at any moment. At 2 p.m. the next day, Grace arrived at her mother-in-law's house, holding Sophia close. The white colonial house, built in the 1920s, usually exuded warmth, but today something felt off. Though tulips bloomed beautifully in the well-tended front garden under the early summer sun, the basket that normally sat by the entrance was missing. She could hear neighborhood children playing on the lawn, but their cheerful voices only amplified her unease. During the 10-minute drive, Eleanor's phone call from yesterday kept replaying in her mind. The urgent tone, the careful choice of words, and what sounded like something falling in the background. Just before hanging up, Eleanor had said, "I believe in you." Thinking about the meaning of those words now gave her an ominous feeling. And most worrying of all was that her mother-in-law, who always came out to greet them, was nowhere to be seen. Eleanor's blue Prius wasn't in the garage or parking area. It was unthinkable for her mother-in-law, who never missed Sunday garden club or Monday book club, to be absent at the promised time. Feeling suspicious, she pressed the doorbell intercom and noticed the door was slightly ajar. It creaked in the wind. "Eleanor?" Her voice trembled slightly. The warmth of Sophia in her arms was her only comfort in this situation. The baby, seeming to sense her mother's anxiety, quietly buried her face in Grace's chest, unlike her usual friendly demeanor. There was no response. When she pushed open the door, an entirely unfamiliar scene greeted her. Shoes that should have been neatly arranged were scattered about, and family photos had fallen from the walls. Wedding photos, Sophia's christening pictures, and last year's Christmas family portrait. The frame glass was broken, its shards scattered across the hallway. As she stepped inside, she felt something under her foot. It was Eleanor's cell phone. The screen was cracked and wouldn't turn on. "Eleanor." She called out louder this time. Sophia began to fuss anxiously. Grace held her daughter tightly and cautiously made her way to the living room. There were drag marks on the hallway carpet. The living room was in even worse condition. A vase on the coffee table had toppled, ivy leaves scattered across the water-soaked floor. Magazines lay open and tossed on the sofa, and several books had fallen from the bookshelf. An album titled Our Family History, that Eleanor treasured, lay splayed open on the floor. The room looked as if someone had desperately searched for something. The rug in front of the fireplace was turned up at the edge, revealing the basement door beneath. That door, which should have been locked, was slightly open. A cold draft wafted up from below. Then she noticed a note on the table. In Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, it simply said, "Run away quickly." Parts of the ink were smeared, suggesting it had been written in haste. Grace's heart began to pound violently. What was happening? Why wasn't Eleanor here? And this warning-like message. She desperately tried to think through her confused mind whether to call 911 or flee immediately. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. The creak of old floorboards broke the silence. Before she could turn around, she heard a familiar voice. "Hello, Grace." It was her husband, Brian. Instead of his usual navy suit, he wore an unfamiliar black jacket. And more importantly, his usual kind expression was gone. In his hand, he held something black and rod-like. A bat, perhaps. Or Brian. Why? Grace backed away, desperately clutching Sophia. There was a cold light in her husband's eyes that she had never seen before. Those eyes, once full of love, now held a terrifying emptiness. "I thought Mother might have said something." But don't worry. She won't interfere anymore. His tone carried something like an irreversible determination. Where is Eleanor? Instead of answering, Brian took a step forward. Before she could comprehend the meaning of his words, Grace's vision began to darken. The last thing she heard was her beloved daughter's cry. That sound seemed to fade away as if in slow motion. As consciousness slipped away, she desperately continued to hold Sophia. If nothing else, she had to protect her precious child. That was her last thought before complete darkness fell. In the darkness of the basement, Eleanor desperately tried to move. Her wrists and ankles were bound, and duct tape covered her mouth. Through the old heating pipes running across the ceiling from the 1920s, a faint light filtered in. In the dusty air, only the clock hands moved mercilessly forward. The damp air stung her skin, and somewhere water dripped steadily. This basement, once used as her husband's study, had become a storage room. Old furniture and cardboard boxes were piled haphazardly, and unused Christmas decorations sat against the wall. The scene made the current situation feel even more surreal. When her son had suddenly visited several hours ago, she never imagined things would turn out like this. Over breakfast, she had tried to tell him the truth. The existence of massive gambling debts, the affair, and the murder plot for insurance money. Last night, she had accidentally found Brian's laptop left open and discovered the horrifying details of the plan. She had intended to report everything to the police. But her son's transformation had come sooner than expected. "Mother, you should have just kept quiet." With those words, her beloved son's hand was raised. The next moment, her consciousness faded, and when she came to, she was already imprisoned in this basement. Eleanor's cell phone was hidden in her clothes. She had slipped it into her pocket during breakfast, and now it was her last hope. The rope binding her wrists was slightly loose due to her son's carelessness. Using the protrusion of the old pipes, she should be able to gradually loosen it. Sounds began to come from upstairs. Had Grace arrived? Had she found the warning note? Anxiety and urgency welled up. She had to hurry. She had to protect her. She had to save her beloved granddaughter from this madness. After a 20-minute struggle, her right hand finally came free. Deep rope burns on her wrist were bleeding, but there was no time to feel the pain. She immediately took out her cell phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. There was no hesitation. Between maternal love for her son and the duty to protect her granddaughter, there was no choice to make. 911, what's your emergency? 377 Maple Street, Greenwich. Attempted murder and imprisonment. Hurry, my son is trying to, his family. Eleanor explained the situation as calmly as possible. Her son's violence, the danger to Grace and her granddaughter, her own imprisonment. On the other end of the line, Susan Williams, a dispatcher with 30 years of experience, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. She had handled numerous domestic violence calls, but the urgency in this mother's voice suggested something extraordinarily serious. "We're dispatching patrol cars now. Please stay on the line. Are you in a safe place?" Just then, a dull thud resonated from upstairs, followed by a baby's cry. Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. "Hurry! My daughter and granddaughter, please, quickly. Soon, police sirens approached. Eleanor listened intently, praying. The officers burst into the house. In the chaos, Brian attempted to escape through the backyard but was apprehended by waiting officers. Eleanor was finally freed. The first thing she saw was Grace collapsed in the living room and Sophia crying loudly. Her granddaughter's cries painfully brought home the reality of this nightmare. Amid the professional voices of paramedics, 3 ambulances headed to the hospital one after another, their red and blue lights flashing. The police officers remaining at the scene began securing evidence. The metal bat used as a weapon. The blood-stained carpet. Eleanor's hastily written note. And the decisive evidence, security camera footage from the basement. The camera Eleanor had secretly installed had recorded everything. After her husband's passing, she had enhanced the home's security system. Detective Michael Thompson, with 30 years of experience, sensed it immediately. This wasn't just domestic violence. It was an attempted premeditated murder. And what prevented it was one mother's courage. He pieced together the case while examining each piece of evidence found in the basement. The blue Prius had simply been moved to the Whole Foods parking lot nearby. Brian had deliberately moved his mother's car out of sight to ensure Grace would arrive. His attempt at a perfect plan had ultimately hastened his downfall. Detective Thompson sighed deeply as he surveyed the scene. The darkness lurking behind the luxurious facade of a family home. But also the power of maternal love that broke through it. Images of numerous cases in this town flashed through his mind. But a mother's decision to send her son to prison to protect her granddaughter was rare indeed. A young officer hurried over. The female victim has regained consciousness. We might be able to take her statement at the hospital. The detective nodded silently. In a private room at Greenwich General Hospital, Grace had regained consciousness. Her head was bandaged, and as she received an IV drip, she stared at the ceiling through blurry vision. The smell of disinfectant stung her nose, and from the hallway came the sounds of nurses' footsteps and squeaking wheelchairs. The regular beeping of monitors marked time in the quiet room. Sophia. When she called her daughter's name in a hoarse voice, her mother-in-law, who had been sleeping beside the bed, woke up. Eleanor's face showed signs of fatigue, and the bandages on her wrists told of the horror she had experienced. It's all right. Sophia is resting in the pediatric ward next door. She had mild dehydration but no other problems. Dr. Jenkins is personally looking after her. Eleanor, you saved us. We can talk later. Rest now. Eleanor gently held her daughter's hand. Just then, there was a knock, and Detective Michael Thompson quietly entered the room. He was a tall man with sharp eyes beneath a gentle expression. His gray suit was slightly wrinkled from hours of investigation, but the dignity of his 30-year career remained unwavering. "How are you feeling?" Detective Thompson asked, lowering his voice. "Better, little by little." Grace tried to sit up but gave up when she felt dizzy. "Please don't strain yourself." The detective sat in a chair by the bed and continued, "This will be difficult to discuss, but if you could tell me any details about the incident." Eleanor gave a small nod, and Grace also indicated her agreement. "First, I should tell you that Brian Anderson has been arrested and charged," the detective began, carefully choosing his words. Our investigation has revealed he had gambling debts. Most of these were accumulated at illegal casinos in Las Vegas. Grace's eyes widened. Her husband never letting go of his phone, the late-night outings, the large expenses. All the changes now made sense. Furthermore, the detective hesitated for a moment but continued, he had a mistress. A woman named Rachel Collins who worked at a casino in Las Vegas. She was a dealer at a high-end casino. The air in the hospital room seemed to freeze. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand tightly. They were after your life insurance money and Eleanor's inheritance. The insurance amount was $5 million. Combined with the inheritance, it would have been enough to pay off all his debts and start a new life. Hot tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. She continued staring at the ceiling, feeling her pillow grow damp. We have several pieces of decisive evidence. The detective took out his tablet. First, the security camera footage Eleanor had installed. Then, the conversations she recorded. The footage showed Brian and his mistress Rachel discussing their murder plot. A plan to make it look like a perfect accident and collect the insurance money. And even the elimination of his troublesome mother. Cold, calculated conversations exchanged as if they were discussing everyday matters. I should have noticed, Grace's voice trembled. The recent changes in his behavior, the late nights, the large expenses, it was all there to see. Don't blame yourself, Eleanor gently advised. No one wants to believe the betrayal of someone they love. Detective Thompson revealed even more shocking facts. According to Collins's statement, this plan had been in preparation for about 4 months, the detective continued while checking his documents. She initially intended to use Brian Anderson merely as a source of money. However, as his gambling debts grew, she began seeking a bigger payoff. The detective produced a photograph. It showed her husband and Rachel intimately close at a luxury hotel bar. A woman with flashy red hair wearing a provocative smile. Her expression revealed a certain calculation. According to her testimony, it was actually she who suggested the insurance fraud plan. Brian apparently hesitated at first. However, as the pressure from illegal casino debt collectors intensified and he became more desperate. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the hallway. Security guards were stopping several reporters trying to push their way toward the hospital room. Detective Thompson stood up and checked the door. Don't worry. As part of the Victim Protection Program, we have 24-hour security in place. All media inquiries will be handled by the Police Public Relations Department. But why today? Grace asked in a trembling voice. Last night, Eleanor accidentally found Brian's laptop left open and discovered the details of the plan. Brian, in a panic, decided to execute the plan ahead of schedule. The detective's explanation was met with heavy silence in the hospital room. The prosecution is now preparing charges including attempted murder, imprisonment, assault, and attempted insurance fraud. Collins will also be charged as a co-conspirator. We're also conducting a parallel investigation into the illegal casinos. Just then, a baby's cry echoed from the hallway, and a nurse entered the room carrying Sophia. I'm sorry, but your daughter woke up and kept asking for her mother. Grace reached out with both arms, forgetting the pain in her bandaged head. Sophia stopped crying when handed to her mother and nestled contentedly against her chest. Her tiny hand gently touched her mother's arm where the four was inserted. "I'm so sorry, Sophia." Grace held her daughter tightly, tears flowing. "It's okay now. Mama will protect you. Always." Eleanor stood up quietly as she watched mother and daughter. She walked to the window and looked down at the hospital garden bathed in early summer twilight. Young maple leaves swayed in the wind, which seemed to herald the arrival of a new season as it whispered through the trees. "We still have a lot to do," Eleanor said without turning around. "But one thing is certain. You and Sophia are safe now." Detective Thompson quietly left the room. In the hallway, he gave brief instructions to a young detective. "Maintain strict protection of the victims. Let's resume interrogation of the Anderson suspect. And arrange for a psychological counselor." 3 months after the incident, as the judge's voice resonated through the Connecticut Superior Court, Grace quietly closed her eyes. Eleanor's hand gently rested on her shoulder. Local media reporters filled their notepads in the gallery. The evidence was perfect. The security camera footage Eleanor had installed, recorded conversations, and detailed testimony from Brian's mistress Rachel Collins. The prosecution clearly proved the meticulously planned murder plot for insurance money. Brian maintained an expressionless face throughout. Only once, when a photo of his infant daughter Sophia was presented as evidence, did his expression briefly contort. Co-conspirator Rachel Collins received a 7-year prison sentence through a plea bargain. Though she tearfully expressed remorse during the trial, her expression never completely lost its calculating nature. A week after the sentencing, Grace and Eleanor moved to a new house. A single-family home in a leafy suburb, slightly removed from Greenwich's quiet residential area. The yard, enclosed by a white picket fence, featured a small sandbox for Sophia to play in. "No one will find us here," Eleanor said as she opened a moving box. The decision to move had been quick. They both understood they could never return to their former home. Grace stood by the window, watching Sophia playing in the yard. Her daughter, now 1 year old, was growing steadily. Her occasional smiles were gradually healing the nightmares of that day. "I received a job offer from Presbyterian Hospital," Grace quietly announced. Returning to work as a nurse marked the beginning of a new life. "That's wonderful," Eleanor showed a genuine smile. "I'm thinking of going back to teaching too. Not at Greenwich, but there's an opportunity for part-time work at a nearby high school." The two women nodded at each other's resolve. Counseling continued. Overcoming trauma wasn't easy. Particularly the anxiety when waking in the middle of the night wouldn't easily disappear. However, psychologist Dr. Sarah Watson patiently supported their recovery. "Sometimes we face the greatest betrayal from those we love most," Dr. Watson often said. "But that experience can also create new bonds." They also met many friends in the church support group. Women who had overcome domestic violence, mothers who had experienced various hardships. Their stories gave Grace great courage. "You are a strong woman." The words of Reverend Janet Wilson, who led the group, resonated in her heart. Meanwhile, Brian had begun serving his prison sentence. All requests for visits were rejected. Even Eleanor avoided visiting her son. She only regularly sent photographs of Sophia. Someday, She'll want to know about her father, Eleanor said. We need to be prepared to tell her the truth when that time comes. Rachel Collins filed for bankruptcy while in prison. Her casino dealer's license was permanently revoked, and she spent her days in prison burdened with enormous debt. Her words during media interviews rang hollow. Life in the new house was gradually finding its rhythm. Eleanor started a small vegetable garden and tended to it with Sophia on weekends. Grace felt a definite sense of fulfillment as she juggled work and childcare. The neighbors watched over them warmly. Though they knew about the incident, they never pried. Instead, they never forgot to show subtle kindness. One evening at twilight, Eleanor sat on the garden bench, watching the sunset. Grace sat down beside her, holding Sophia. Eleanor, back then, how could you stay so calm? After a long silence, Eleanor quietly answered. Because as a mother, I had something to protect. The two women nodded silently at those words. Something to protect. That something was now beginning a new life with them in this garden. Birds chirped in the twilight sky. Maple leaves swayed in the wind, casting shadows across the garden. As if announcing the beginning of a new season.